Hey, this is Troy again, the host of your favorite technology podcast, What the Tech. Today, we'll be talking to a technology founder that is going to educate us on what it takes to bootstrap a tech company. So, for those of you that have questions about bootstrapping, when does it make sense and how does it work? We'll be diving deeply into that and much more. So, sit back and relax and join us as we learn about how you can bootstrap your tech company and also if it makes sense. Also, don't forget to check out my website, www.troyvermillion.com, where you can find all the latest episodes of What the Tech, plus other cool stuff. Shameless plug complete. Let's go. All right, our guest today is Steve Benson, a highly regarded technology leader and co-founder of Badger Maps. Now, Steve developed his passion for mapping at the University of Wisconsin, where he studied geography before receiving his MBA from Stanford. Now, after leaving a successful career at IBM and HP Autonomy, Steve joined Google in 2008 and worked in their Maps and Earth products for about 4 years. Now, Steve currently resides in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's an avid outdoor enthusiast. And when he's not working on technology solutions for Badger Maps, you can find him training to be the best dad he can possibly be, camping with friends, or snowboarding down a mountain. Steve has a deep understanding of potential of mapping technologies, something that really shines through in all the work he does at Badger Maps. So I'm very excited to have him here with me to give us some insights on bootstrapping his company to 5 million and also to share some of the insights of his interesting journey with us. So Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Troy. Thanks for having me. This is great to be here.
Yeah, man. Excited to hear your story. I think what you do is super interesting, but I also love the fact that you're such like a pure sales guy. You know, we talked a little bit about your podcast and I've listened to some of them as well. And so I hope you'll maybe drop some nuggets, not only about what you did to bootstrap your company, but also, you know, what are some real key takeaways that the listeners, you know, if they're trying to do the same as you and building a dynamic and successful company, you know, what were some of the things that you did as well? So excited to have this conversation. I told you that we would start off with kind of an icebreaker question for you. I like to call it EAT as an acronym. And the first part of that is I'd like you to share something embarrassing with my listeners that you kind of learned from. And then an adversity that you encountered in your life that, again, you know, kind of change the way you look at things or, you know, certainly your approach, and then a truth that you live by.
All right, sure. So, well, I guess an embarrassing thing about me is that even though I have a degree in geography and I run a mapping company, I'm still pretty good at getting lost.
Is that right?
So I've been sure on which way was east enough times and been wrong about it. But I guess the lesson being, you know, if you don't have the compass in your hand right now, you're still not an expert, and you're not an expert in things. But so yeah, an adversity. You know, I think the choosing to bootstrap a company as opposed to bringing in real money to actually do it with all the right resources behind you has definitely been. I've overcome a lot of challenges to do that, and the company is you know, bootstrapped from over the last 11 years. Up to where we have like 70 employees now, and we've solved a real problem for people. So
That's incredible.
It's been a fun ride, but that's definitely, you know, you encounter a lot of headwinds when you can't afford anything, and we still can't really afford anything. You'd be surprised how fast you can spend $5.5 million a year. It goes right out the door.
Yeah, I bet. And then what truth do you live by?
What truth do I live by? I guess hopefully a lot of truths, but a good one is that comes to mind is, you know, whatever value that you create in the world, you get to keep about 10%. So if you just, and it all kind of, you know, not necessarily in a karmic way, but just because of the way the world works, if you know, even if you don't capture it directly, you capture it indirectly. So I just kind of seek to create whatever value I can, and for other people. And I think that enough of it circles back around that selfishly, it's always worthwhile to create value for others.
I love that. That's really good, man. And by the way, you live pretty close to the mountains, so you can kind of trust that that's east if you ever look up and, and need some directions. Because you live
That is a helpful thing about Salt Lake. I grew up in Chicago where
right.
the lake was always east. Now I've always got the mountains to the west, but I guess even in the Bay Area, there's always like some points that you can look up and figure out where you're at. But somehow, still, I could get lost. It's possible.
It's
So
still
even
there.
with Google, even when I worked in the Google Maps team before, you know, I've got a long resume of mapping. So it's truly surprising how lost I can get.
That's impressive. That with all of your background and experience with maps, that in geography, that you could still get lost. But like, look, it is a special skill to kind of know where you're at. I'm one of those people. I kind of always know how to get back to where I came from, the direction that I'm pointing. My poor wife, we joke around with her and tell her, that the GPS eventually is going to tell her to pull over, give her keys to her husband, and stop driving. She's got this thing that she does, Steve, that's pretty funny. You'll probably appreciate it. Basically, if she doesn't know where she's going, she always takes a right. Always. And
Hmm.
and it's
Hmm.
almost as confident, like that she knows exactly where she's going. And I can't tell you how many times, we're walking out of the mall and she'll take immediate right. It's always an immediate right. And then I'll be like, babe, it's over there. It's left. we're leaving the same exact door we came in from. But yeah, no, that's funny. So
As long as something's not behind you, one out of three times you're going to be correct just taking a right.
yeah, it's either straight, left, or right, or
Right.
a portion of either. But yeah, she's going to get it right sometimes, and I think that's what she's counting on. She's banking on it.
Well, and humans remember the successes. You know, it's like gambling. You remember that one time you won rather than the three times you didn't.
That's a really great point. Um, well, thanks for sharing those. I think it's always nice to know that somebody who's built a company like that actually has some things that they've learned from along the year, the path and so forth. And so we'll dig into more of that, but it's good to kind of kick it off that way. So tell me a little bit about how, because we talked about this in our first conversation, how you used, instead of investors, how you used debt in your company, and what do you feel like maybe were some of the advantages or disadvantages to doing it that way versus fundraising the typical way you might see a technology company with equity and investors and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the way that I did it isn't the right way for everyone. I mean, there's definitely
Right.
an important place for venture capital, but it's more often than not with businesses not the right way to go, just because most businesses aren't a fit for the venture model. Um, but like they need a very specific type of business that's going to have a very very strong return because every one of their investments needs to be able to really pay back the fund a lot, pay back a lot of their funds. If they're going to own 20% of a business and get a $500 million return, that means that had to be a $2.5 billion exit. So
Yeah.
there's very few exits that actually match, and depending on the fund size, all those numbers change a little bit. They flex up and down, but there's very few businesses that are kind of that fit within that model. A lot more businesses are a lot lower growth and a lot more boring, I guess I'd say. And they're not most businesses aren't prosecuting a unicorn type idea.
Mm-hmm.
So but for a lot of those businesses that aren't, a better fit is to bring in debt to kind of be able to make investments and get a greater return on for the business than the debt was costing, which is kind of the case when it makes sense. But our history with debt, I've used three debt providers over the years, and I've
Okay.
probably done about $6 million in debt over the years. So not that we have $6 million of debt outstanding right now, because we've paid it. You keep paying it down and adding more on top, and paying that one down and adding more on top. I guess some of the things to think about, or the gotchas, things to watch out for an executive looking at debt. I think first of all, for a lot of there's a lot of short term debt out there, which I think carries a lot of risk. Um, there's a lot of people want to loan you money for a year, right?
Right.
But if you're using that investment, if you're using that capital to make investments, say most investments don't pay back that quickly. There are a few, like if you're like, I have no money to run Google ads, I've run some experiments, and I figured out with these keyword strategies on, I put $1,000 in and $1,500 comes out at the bottom, and I can measure it and it's right there. That's a very quick payback period. There aren't that many paybacks of that nature for businesses, especially startup businesses in the technology space. If you're planning on hiring an engineer with the money, for example, you got to bring them up to speed. They start pushing code, they start building something, they start creating value, and then eventually you sell the value that they've created. That's a much longer payback period, and so a year's just not long enough. You have to kind of match the payback period of your debt with the payback period of the investments you're making. And there's some danger there if you've got some kind of recurring line, because if you talk to a debt provider that gives you a year long piece of debt, they'll say, oh well, you can just get another piece of debt in the future. But maybe you can, maybe you can't. It's never, you can never count on that. And so if you can't, if the growth from the investments isn't going to allow you to pay back the debt, you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation. So for most software companies, I'd say anything less than 36 months is really pretty risky, and I'd probably try to shoot to go with a provider that would give me 48 months. And I think other gotchas, you got to really go through the contracts. There's certain lenders have some really nasty stuff in there and as a consumer, we have consumer protection policies and laws and agencies in America. As a business, you don't have any of those, so people are allowed to be a lot more aggressive with you. The lenders are, and so there's a lot of kind of scuzzy lenders out there that have some really nasty terms in their in what they're doing. Covenants that say, hey, well, if you have to do this, you have to do this or achieve this level of growth, or meet these financial covenants, or else or else you're in default. So things like liquidity,
Really?
like you have to keep a certain amount of liquidity in the bank. And remember that changes the economics of the loan, right? Like if I were going to loan you $2 million, but
Right.
a term was you always have to have $1 million in the bank. Well, I really just loaned you $1 million. If you're not allowed to use the second million, but you have to pay me interest on it, you just basically doubled your interest rate, right?
Right.
So a little 2-line term in a 40-page contract can be super important. You're like, oh, I thought I was getting a 12% loan. Turns out it's a 24% loan. EBITDA or MRR covenants or growth covenants, other things that they can do that if you trip trip it, you have to pay them back really quickly or pay them back at a higher rate, can really get you in trouble fast. And there's a lot of BS in the fintech world and the lending world today. They also have a lot of confusing terms that you really need to be pretty good at Excel to figure out what they're actually offering you. Like there's a lot of, and anytime someone's given you an amount of money and you're paying them back with with payments over time, you can compare these loans, even if they're different structures, by just converting it to an APR, right? APR, just like a loan in your house, right? Like that's a super simple loan. You get an amount of money and you pay the same amount every month. But there's a lot more complex instruments that they'll use with businesses. Like they'll make it based on the amount of revenue you're getting, or they'll make it based on new customers. There's a bunch of different ways they can. But in the end, if someone's giving you money and you're repaying them back, you can figure out what the APR is and compare the loans. Another important gotcha that comes to mind is use of proceeds. Some lenders will say, "Hey, you have to spend the money on this," or it doesn't count. You can't spend the money if it's not on that. That's a kind of weird, annoying one, but you see that sometimes. Penalties and fees is a good one. Like you want to really understand, Do I have to pay your legal fees? Do I have to pay to, $35,000 to just get this contract put together because I owed you a $10,000 sourcing fee or origination fee, and then I owe you 25 grand for your lawyers when really isn't this just the same contract every time?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll juice their returns in those ways, which is fine, but you just have to calculate that when if one you have to calculate that in the that first payment of 35K needs to go into your spreadsheet and be calculated as a cost, as a part of the overall APR or cost of a loan, right?
Right.
Um, so then there can be tricky things in there too, like you can't just pay them back. So they'll have some, and it's confusing what that would mean, because they won't just say you can't pay us back, all at once, but they'll say, oh, if you do pay us back, you have to pay us the interest that you would have owed us if you let the loan go to term, which means you can't, and all that means is you can't swap them out. You can't recap your debt with anyone else.
That's right. Yeah, because
So
there's no
that's
advantage.
kind of the big. Those are the big ones that jump out at me in terms of what you got to watch out for.
I appreciate you sharing the gotchas, because I think, when you get to a certain point, you feel like you got a viable product or service solution that the world needs to see. I think when, you're not getting I guess the ball rolling quite yet with investors, you start to maybe get a little bit desperate for that money. But, I would argue that even then you're not coming at it from a point of view that is probably considering those I gotchas, right? That are often kind of hidden in the bowels of the paperwork that they're asking you to sign. How did you buy way?
Right, and it can create a ton things like that can create a ton of risk, right? Like let's just say that you agree that you'll grow 10% a year, which is
Right.
very conservative, right? Most SaaS companies want to be growing way faster than that. But let's just say that you have that covenant, which seems reasonable until COVID hits. We grew negative 8% in 2020, and last year
Right.
we grew 30%, right? So we didn't predict. We thought 2020 would have been a great year. It started out great, but so I would have, it would have made sense to sign an agreement saying, oh yeah, we'll grow 10% a year. I mean, we've always grown way more than that. So that's an easy covenant. But now you can go into default on a loan, and just when you need the money the most, because your employees also need to feed their families, right? So your revenue just contracted. Now you owe your entire loan back to your lender. And so that creates a ton of risk to the business. Whereas we didn't have a loan of that nature. And so we were just able to compress our spend a little bit and just kind of weather the storm and come out the other side just fine.
So in your experience, as you were evaluating all of these different options for funding, your business through debt, what percentage of those had clauses like that were, strictly a disadvantage to your organization? Would you say a majority of the opportunities that were out there that you had to kind of negotiate through those things, and were they negotiable?
Oh, vast majority of
yeah.
lenders
Okay.
are scumbags. Vast majority. And there's a whole industry of expensive loans floating around out there, and exploitative loans that are floating around out there. And there are some really great lenders out there too. Some of the good ones that come to mind are Founder Path, Scaleworks, Lighter Capital. So, and this is just the SaaS industry, but there's an incredible amount of lenders that you don't want to do business with floating around out there. There's a huge industry in the U.S. and around the world, I think. But there are some great ones to work with. I've done business with all three of those, and currently I do business with Founder Path, which is a SaaS specific lender.
That's great. And so you were looking for those terms. Like, is there a certain, you mentioned some pitfalls, like are there certain things that you are looking for when you were evaluating those that were like indicators that these were good groups to work with?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for starters, if there are if they have those types of red flag terms, you just can't do business with them, right? Like, and you can assume that it's dangerous equity, dangerous capital rather. If you're if you're trying to do, if you're looking at the terms, you're like, wow, this really creates a lot of risk, then that's probably not someone you should do business with. And then just the rate, right? And the rates aren't always super clear. You have to be able to convert it to an APR before you can really. And there's a lot of really, there's a lot of rates that are 20%, 25%, 40%. But if you don't know how to calculate what they've offered you, it can be pretty confusing to figure that out, right? And they a lot of times they'll have a lot of hidden fees and that sort of thing, and or they'll want you to give them money before you, just to kind of go down the line with them before you've seen the terms. That's a huge red flag. So that there's as you're starting to interact with someone, you'll see those red flags, and that's a good time to walk.
Good points. Good points. So let's talk. So we talked a little bit about debt here, but let's talk about some of the other things when you're, having to bootstrap that you kind of have to live without, because I've been in large SaaS companies that get a lot of money. I've been in the small firms that, you've got typically private equity money that a lot of times, if it's a little more established. I've never personally worked in a venture funded or angel funded group, but talk about and maybe contrast some of those different methodologies and what you see from a growth standpoint, and maybe what you experience from a founder standpoint on kind of getting things off the ground and being established.
Well, I think the way a business is capitalized can change a lot, right? It can change a lot about the culture. If you I guess first it's probably useful to talk about the difference between private equity and venture. Venture capital is a type of private equity. Private equity just means you're
private money.
It's private money, right? They've raised a fund and they're applying the private money as opposed to public, as opposed to people investing in a company that's a public company. So venture capital is one type of private equity that tends to focus on smaller, super high growth businesses. But there's a lot of overlap between companies that would, call themselves growth private equity companies versus late stage venture capital. It's almost a branding exercise more than anything. But I think venture implies they're looking to take high risk, high return. Private equity indicates low risk and still a high return, but a more moderated return. Meaning, like, a private equity company may want to buy 20% of your company for $20 million, and so they're going to own it. The company's worth $100 million, and they want to exit their position in 7 years with a valuation of the company being $400 million. Right. So they've 4x their money. They put in $20 million, they walked with $80 million. They can, most private equity companies that's a win to them. A venture capital company, they put $20 million on the same valuation, $100 million valuation. They want to sell that business for $1 billion, but they are willing to stomach that it may be worth nothing. Whereas the private equity firm, they're not taking risks of that nature. So they want to invest in 10 companies that all go from where they take their money and go from 20 to 80, to use simple numbers. Whereas the venture capital company wanted this one to go to $1 billion, and this one's going to be a goose egg. This one, they just get their money back, but they have the stomach to take those. Right. To take those.
They're essentially
eggs.
Looking for.
Whereas the private equity,
they're essentially
is not
looking for the unicorn one. As you mentioned earlier, that could potentially be such a home run for their investment that it dwarfs all other, misses that they've made in the market.
Exactly. If you're shooting arrows at unicorns, you expect to miss sometimes. But if you're bopping a cow in the head with a hammer, you don't expect it. You don't expect to miss.
Where's it gonna go?
Right. So the cow's worth a lot less than the unicorn, though, because you grind up that horn and it's magic powder.
Yeah, that's right. Or in some places they'll snort it or whatever.
That works too. I mean, whatever the market wants to do with it with the powder.
That's funny. Well, And I appreciate you kind of saying that. So, like, as you were kind of bootstrapping, you're reinvesting money that you've earned back into the business. You're using some debt, healthy debt, to kind of fund your initiatives. Like, talk about what that looks like, because I'd like to focus more on that and how you did it, successfully. Because after 11 years, a lot of these companies could get to 5 million in a year or two, like real quick, when you've got an influx of cash. But the problem is that doesn't mean they're profitable. It just means that they've gotten to the revenue point. And so a lot of times, when you're bootstrapping an organization like you have, you make very careful and strategic and smart decisions, because every dollar really needs to stretch as far as it can. So I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on how you did it and why you think it worked, better than going the other direction with it.
Well, and I wouldn't say that necessarily my way was better than raising venture capital. It's just it's a different strategy, right? Like we probably wouldn't have been successful raising venture capital because they would have pushed things to get a faster return sooner, or a higher return sooner, and than this has been. Like they would not have considered this a win if they had invested $10 million at a $50 million valuation in 2012, and today it's making $5 million. They consider that a loss because they have a timeline
Right.
on their fund, right? So they have 10 years, and usually 10 years, and then they have to return the money they raised to their investors, their LPs. And so this is a very successful business from my perspective, or from my employees' perspective. But in that case, they would not have felt like this was going well, and they really have
Right.
control of the company, right? I mean, often on the A round, almost certainly on the B round, they can fire the CEO. They're going to try, they're going to do things to try to drag the business up the hill faster, and take risks to accomplish that. And maybe that would have worked with us. Maybe that wouldn't have. Who knows? But um, I guess, to your original question, like, when you're bootstrapping, you're always matching the money you're making with what you're spending, by definition. And even if you're able to raise debt, you can't raise that much debt compared to like the injections that you can get
Right.
with equity investments, right? Like, if a software company that's making $1 million, if they could raise $10 million on an A round from venture, that same software company can raise five
That's
hundred
right.
thousand in
Yeah.
debt. So it's a 20x difference. So debt extends your ability to spend a little bit, but because you're paying interest on it, it's really not expend over time. It's not extending that all that much, because now you're paying the interest and the principal back a few years into it. But it does give you a little juice, and for us, it was really useful. It basically for years allowed us to have five engineers that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to
Right.
afford. Today, as we're paying the debt back, it means we have five engineers less than we'd be able to afford, but we have money coming in to pay for those
That's right.
engineers today.
And you've
So,
built a more
um,
dynamic product over
but
that
you're
time period.
right. I wouldn't have been able to build as good. I really needed, the first five engineers. You need to go from 25 to 30 engineers
Right.
a lot less, right? So, getting the train out of the station, that can be very helpful. But a bootstrap business really does feel very different than a business that you've really applied a lot of
Yeah.
capital to,
100%.
because and not to say that one is that much easier than the other either. Capital creates a lot of challenges. Like, if you raise, if you let's just use that $1 million business example. There, you're making $1 million a year, and you just brought in $10 million, and they're going to want you to spend that money over 2 years, right? They don't want you to spend that money at $1 million a year over 10 years. They want you to spend it over the next 2 years, because they're in a big hurry, right? They need you to move to get their return in time. So if you're going to spend $5 million a year for the next 2 years, and you're making $1 million a year, you're talking about being a company that's five times larger, but needs to be making $5 million a year in 2 years, or you need to be able to raise another round. And so a lot of people get in trouble on that needing another round piece. Like they haven't made enough, they haven't shown the progress and hit the milestones that, so, year two in their business's life, they raised the venture capital. And now they jump from spending $1 million a year, which they had, to $5 million a year, which is spending other people's money, right? So your team jumps from 7 people to 50 people overnight. Yep. And but now you really have to produce results in the next 2 years and be able to and show that you're moving in that direction earlier, because you can't just start raising on month 23. You have to start raising on month 12.
Yeah.
so it's not necessarily easier to be a bootstrapper by any means, even, or it's not necessarily harder to be a bootstrapper, and it's not necessarily easier. They both directions you can go are very challenging.
I think you're going to have challenges either way. I think the challenges are similar in some ways, right? It's still, how are you going to get the capital you need to grow? But the question is, like, who's making those decisions as well? When you bootstrap something, if you get good terms on your debt, right, maybe you grow slower because you just don't have the same amount of funding, but you get the decision, of how that happens in most cases, right? Versus, like you said, hey, I was the founder of this company, and a year later, I wasn't doing it the way that my investors said, and they had a clause in my contract that they could pull me off of, that top VIP position, right?
Well, investors control the board often very quickly, right? If they have 2 board members and you have 1, then or even if you have 2 and they have 2, but you're one of the 2 and you have to recuse yourself on a vote about firing you because there'd be a conflict of interest, then they still they can take control of the company, and so for even after the A round, they may say, okay, well, you guys get 2 votes, we get 2 votes, we'll keep it really, but on an important decision of that nature, they now have control of the company and can kind of do what they want.
And that's a tough thing if you help found the company. So taking a kind of a walk away from the kind of,
well, what they want can be challenging and problematic, or what they want could be correct and better for everybody if you're a bad manager.
Yeah, well,
it's, once again, double-edged sword.
It is a double-edged sword. It's a good point, because not everybody who can, has got the technical know-how to maybe start a technology or SaaS-based company can necessarily get you to that next level from a business acumen standpoint.
For sure, yeah. Not everyone's good at everything, and most people are only good at one thing. If you're lucky, you're good at one thing, really. And most people either come from starting a software company, either come from a more of a business background, or they come from an engineering background. And it turns out it's hard to be good at both of those things, right? So if 2 engineers start a software company and they raise funding, and a lot of times they're not as good at running a business as a professional business person who the VCs would prefer to be running the place if it really starts growing and doing well. And on the other hand, 2 business people starting a business are probably going to make a lot of technology mistakes. So you want to have people with all these skill sets in a position of power in the organization, and knowing what you don't know is almost more important than knowing what you do know.
No truer words have ever been said. That's like trying to figure out what your wife wants, right? When she's clearly telling you something, but you're like, we're not picking up what they're putting down. I don't know how many times that's happened to me.
I mean, all the humans are very different, right? And we're good at different things and think about things in different ways. And it's one of the great challenges of life, and in all of its elements, is understanding.
That's right.
Humans,
we're odd and interesting and peculiar creatures, for sure. So let's talk about your strengths, because you mentioned that it's important that you kind of have all of those strengths, and I know one of yours has primarily been on selling for a long time, and you even have a podcast that's all about it. So I'm curious, like, how did you, with your talent in the area of sales and other things and your background and, mapping and so forth, like, how did you balance those things? I know that you were probably the best salesperson for the entire organization, if not now, certainly at the very beginning, right? So like maybe kind of share some of that.
Yeah, well, so my background was in field sales, and then I obviously made a piece of software for field salespeople. So it always helps if you're scratching your own itch from a product perspective, because you tend to make fewer directional mistakes from a product perspective if you truly understand the problem and understand the user that's going to be using the product. Um, it's a very helpful weapon for a startup to have selling capabilities, on the executive team. And I think you always, you always want someone who has those types of capabilities on your team. Um, see someone that if you don't have anyone with any sales capabilities on a team, it's very easy to be sailing in the wrong direction by 5% in the 5% wrong direction, right? And then you sail for a year in the wrong direction. Now you've actually gone pretty far in the, even if it's just a little off, now you've got to double back
Right.
pretty good. Um, so it really helps, I think, if you have a founder who has that skill set and knows how to really sell a product that's not even built yet. Um, it is, because then if you've got someone who's able to drum up 100 conversations with people that will be buying this, and asking them, okay, so hey, here's the thing that we're going to be building. Could you, is this solving the problem that you're describing? I'm so glad you're taking the time to tell me about your problems here. You know, it, and they're like, if they're nodding their head and saying, yeah, I love this, I need this, and then then you're able to say, well, fantastic. If I build this over the next year, would you be willing to buy it for this much money a month? And then that really keeps you calibrated on building the right thing, and enables you to circle back to that same group, and once you have a minimum sellable product, and have a lot of those early people that you were talking to calibrating the direction of the product, making them early customers, and then you're able to kind of really that's what enables you to bootstrap a business. But I think even if you're not trying to bootstrap, having someone on the founding team who's really good at getting a lot of those conversations started is a real asset, and keeps you on the right track. And my advice to founding teams that don't have that capability, but they're looking to hire their first person who's really going to be customer facing, you really have to listen very carefully to that person, because they're talking to they're kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? And so they're an amazing source of information, and it's very easy if you're not staying close to customers and really talking to them. And I'm sure everybody says this, but if it's hard to operationalize being really close to customers if you don't have someone who's really good at their skill set involves being really close to customers, right? And that it's not a natural motion for often the people that make the software to be close to the people that are going to be using the software. And so that's, I think, a lot of great companies have died on that hill.
I was going to ask you because, and you hinted at some of the ideas that you had there, as far as like getting out ahead of your minimum product. Like, you don't have anything built yet, you've got more ideas than you actually have, programming per se. What was your go-to-market strategy? It sounds like you kind of explored a little bit of that with reaching out to your ideal audience or prospect, and kind of, I guess, hypothetically talking about, like, this is what we're creating, would you be interested if we could, right?
Yeah. Would you be interested, and would you pay this much money a month for it? That final question is important, because no one's going to tell you that your baby's ugly or that your idea is stupid. But when you actually ask them, well, would you pay for it? They're like, if they start backpedaling, saying, oh, well, I don't know if it'd be the right fit for me or us,
Right.
you got a problem, right? So, because
That's right.
and you can ask, okay, oh, well, who is it for then? What are you talking about? Because you thought it was great for someone, and they're like, I don't know, but not us. That's a bad thing. But yeah, I think it's really important to not only identify your ideal customer profile very early on before you have a product built, but really have a lot of conversations going with that ideal customer profile, people who have that. And there's a lot of ways to find people in the world today. LinkedIn probably is the
Right.
best one, but if we were solving problems for field salespeople, right? So it was like in certain industries that have a lot of field salespeople, the people that are enabling the sales team with technology were the right people for us to talk to. So sales operations people, sales managers, VPs of sales, um, sales trainers, and even people that were in the sales role. We needed to talk to and interact with as many of those guys as we could in these industries that we knew had a ton of field salespeople. So like for us, medical device was one of the earliest ones that we really were going after. It's big industry, a lot of money in it, and it's easy to figure out, hey, who are the sales operations people in these areas of medical devices that we know and we can see on LinkedIn. We can see they have a ton of salespeople who are obviously out in the field meeting with doctors. That was who I was having conversations with, and that's who we were calibrating our product and making decisions based on what we were going to build first, based on what they were talking about their
Yeah.
needs being.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about your product and what you actually built, because I think that's imperative to the conversation of, your go-to-market strategy would be different depending on what type of SaaS-based platform you have and who your target market is. So maybe just touch on exactly what your technology does right now, what it solves, because you already kind of shared what your ideal client, at least initially, looked like.
Yeah. So what Badger Maps does is we help field sales teams with a variety of things, but basically being more organized in the field. Um, so um, field salespeople or outside salespeople, um, they basically go out in the field and meet with their customers, right? So they might be meeting with 8, 10, 12 customers in a day, right? And imagine like a medical device salesperson meeting with
Right.
doctors, or a tire salesman selling tires, or a beer salesman going to different bars. And and so what we do is we take all their customers and prospects and put them on a map for them, give them routing capabilities, give them the ability to kind of filter and sort the information on a map, and we put it all on their mobile device, where they can then, which their phone is in their pocket, it's easy to capture information on that information, then it gets sent immediately back to their CRM. And a lot of companies have a lot of information about their customers in their CRM, but it's just not in a useful format if you were to be going out into the field. Because we're just like, if you were looking for a Thai food restaurant, you wouldn't want a list of all the Thai food restaurants in Northern California. You'd want to know which ones are rated like this, which ones are around me right now, you know, which ones can I get an open table reservation at? Like, so you want what Yelp's done, which is basically taking all that large database of all Thai food restaurants in Northern California and putting it on a map for you, and allowing you to filter and sort by what's open now, that sort of thing.
Right.
But if you're a field salesperson, you don't just want one Thai food place. You want, tomorrow you're going to see 8, and you've got to make decisions about who's the most important. How am I? Because a salesperson's paid to make sales, right? So they don't just want to meet with not the most likely to close, but they want to meet with the customers that are they want to invest their time where they're going to get the highest
Right.
return.
Yeah, and that's hard to kind of, for any salesperson being in sales as long as I've been. I used to work really in that kind of field sales role when I was with the Centos Corporation. And, how do you spend your time every single day? Who do you spend it in front of? Which doors am I going to knock on? What am I going to get the best ROI out of? And your technology helps them do that, right?
Right. That's exactly right. We help them get the most out of their time in the next, when they're in the field
Yeah.
next week. Right. So we help them plan as things change when they're in the field. We help them make decisions about, where should we go next? This meeting just canceled. What do I do now? Now I have to zigzag. Now this guy just called and I have to drive across town. How should I rearrange my day to not zigzag
Right.
all around town?
Yeah.
Um, and giving them tools to do all this stuff effectively right in their pocket really quickly it saves them a lot of time, makes them a lot more effective, and they get real results out of it on the sales side, right? they sell, the average sales team of 10 people sells just under $1 million more a year. And these are mostly companies that are selling things like beer and med devices and stuff like that, right? So really, if a team of 10 is selling $1 million more a year, it's a material
Yeah,
number.
100%. I'm curious, how did you come up with the idea of Badger Maps?
Well, I was in field sales, and so and I'm hardly a creative genius. Like I was literally working on the Google Maps team, which is Google Maps is, I mean, consumers think of it as an app on their phone, but they also have an API which enables you to put maps into other applications, and that's the part that I was working with. And So I was working at Google on Google Maps as in a field sales capacity, and so I was in charge of the Western U.S. API sales into that, and so I understood the problem and I understood the solution, and it was kind of, this is only 11 years ago, but the iPhone was new then and it wasn't strong enough at that time. Like the first version of Badger didn't work on the iPhone; it had to work on the iPad because only that had enough muscle to run a piece of software like this. So it was they were simpler devices then, but because I had worked on the mobile side at Google, I understood where these devices were going. I understood how the speeds of the mobile internet were changing, the capacity of the capabilities of these devices, and the capabilities of the Google Maps API and I understood the problem. So I was hardly a creative genius. I was just in the right place at the right time. I mean, I understood kind of what was going on, and so we were able to build basically new technology. These mobile devices and the Google Maps API enabled a problem that has been around for thousands of years to be solved. If you could put an iPhone in the hand of a sales rep in 1920, it would have been just as useful as it would be to a sales rep today. It's just these things didn't exist then.
Yeah, it's incredible what we can do and how much more efficient. But I would also argue that the demands are greater on productivity and other things because there is so much efficiency in many ways, right?
Yeah. Well, and sales management wants to understand what's going on in the field, and a lot of technology isn't really mobilely enabled the way a field salesperson needs it. And so, we enable that other technology. Like we don't replace a CRM system. We enable the existing CRM system to be really useful for the person who's going out into the field or for the person who's managing the people that are in the field.
Yeah, give some examples of that. Like, I've seen some of these specific like mapping type systems work well within like HVAC, companies or service-based companies where they're trying to say, well, how do I set up this, this route per se, or this, group of clients for this person for Tuesday, right? And how can it be effective? But I also want to, keep an eye on the maintenance of the vehicle. I want to keep an eye on, is this person speeding? Like there's certain things, so I can keep manage my insurance. So there's a lot of different solutions out there. But correct me if I'm wrong. You're really the only solution that goes as deep as you do, with the purpose of helping salespeople sell more in the field.
We're not the only one, but I guess what you're talking about is like fleet management software, and field service management software, which is much more about you're dispatching. You've got a team of plumbers, and you're dispatching different plumbers to different locations based on, well, is this a plugged sink, which is not urgent, or an exploding toilet, which is urgent? And I don't want to send someone to fix the exploding toilet unless I know that the inventory part for that exploding toilet is in the back of this person's car. If this guy used his yesterday on that other exploding toilet, I can't send him today because he hasn't been back to base yet. There's software specifically for dispatch of that nature. And there's also, you mentioned like the speeding and the, where are my trucking assets, and, what's my maintenance, what truck is due for what maintenance. There's fleet management software. And I guess both of those things are cousins to what we do. But yeah, we're focused just on field salespeople. We do about 40% of our business is in field services, but it's not as much that dispatch situation. It's more someone who's managing I would say from our perspective, they behave like salespeople as opposed to behaving like service people. They're not trying to manage their inventory out of our system. They already have a system for that. They're not trying to dispatch a bunch of people around a city like a bunch of plumbers in real time. It's more like this service person runs all these oil derricks in this area, or runs the relationship with all these places in this area. And so that's more the type of person that would use us to gather data and organize their time in the field. So if they behave like salespeople, and then there are salespeople that behave like service people as well, which is confusing. But yeah, there's trucking software, there's field service software, there's field sales software, and we have competitors too. I mean, so our biggest competitor was purchased by Salesforce. They were a company called Map Anything. Now they're just called Salesforce Maps. And so Salesforce decided that this mapping stuff was strategic enough to bring into their CRM, and they wanted to own it. But we bring what we do to Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics CRM and Zoho CRM and Insightly CRM and NetSuite and really all these different all these popular CRMs. We bring HubSpot, we bring our stuff to
Right.
them and bring these capabilities to them. So we're not the only game in town, but our biggest competitor was picked up by Salesforce. Although interestingly, they've kind of taken them in a different direction a little bit. It seems like they bought them much more for that field service side. So a lot of the stuff they've done is more on that. I think they were really concerned about losing business to Service Titan and the companies like that. The big because those companies behave a lot more like a it's CRM ERP system for these field service type businesses, and so I think Salesforce was probably losing some money to those guys, and they wanted to stop the
Yeah.
bleeding there.
So so let me ask this, kind of thinking about the future. What do you think the future of your industry looks like? Whether you're developing for it now, or you just see the industry is going to say, hey, this is kind of a, um, call it 2030. Like, what is it going to look like?
I mean, I think in general, the software industry will continue to eat the world, as they're saying. I mean, I think more and more software is doing just more and more tasks that people used to do, and they're doing it does it more efficiently and enables people to get more done. And really, half of a company now. I mean, half of what a company gets done is done by servers somewhere as opposed to by people. So, I think that trend will just continue. More and more problems of the world will be solved by computers in a more automated way. I think AI just makes that even more possible as that gets tuned. But it's just doing more and more tasks with the servers,
Yeah.
not the people.
I think there's, I guess there's two different philosophies I'm seeing kind of come from that too. It's like, oh, then my people can get more done, which is great. But you're actually seeing a trend where people are working less now than they ever have, like less total hours, just from a global economic standpoint than we ever have. I think it was back in the 1950s, the average work week looked like 50 plus hours, and now I think we're creeping below 35 for the average person. I do think that trend will probably continue to the point where we're truly as a global economy working part time, which I think is interesting to think about, because a lot of these tasks, whether it's software automation or mechanical automation that you're seeing kind of really develop, it starts to do more and more of those even more complicated kind of repetitive things. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, and what maybe kind of the future state looks like. Do you think we'll just work less hours and we'll have more free time, or do you think we'll have we'll just ask more strategic type things from our employees?
Tough to say. I mean, I would say that if history is a teacher, this will, the computing revolution is similar to the agricultural revolution, where you used to need a whole bunch of guys with big curved knives to get the weed off
That's right.
out of the ground, right? But so 90% of the economy is working in agriculture or something in 1900. I don't know the
Yeah,
exact stats,
there's
but
a lot.
100 years later, 5% of people are working in agriculture, but we're still operating at a full employment model, and that'll probably. My guess is that trend continues. There's just it's a bad time to learn to become an accountant and a better time to learn to become a masseuse, because that accounting the computers can do. Masseusing, I don't know if a computer can do that. Maybe it can, I don't know, but I'm not sure where the technology on masseusing is going. But
Well, I'll tell you this. I'll share
the
this with you, Stephen. My new Cadillac will it does the back rub thing. So like that was a new experience for me. It just kind of does this rolling thing and it rubs my back just in case I'm getting a little tense.
there you
So
go. Well, that's see, but yeah, I mean, I think there are. My guess is that the economy will soak up those productive hours
yeah.
somewhere else. So you can let your Gen Z friends know that they're not just going to be able to surf Instagram all day in the future. They're gonna have to work for
That's
a
what
living.
they want to do though. So like, this whole TikTok thing too, man,
That's
is blowing my
that's.
mind. Just the amount of grown
It's.
people spending all their time watching TikTok just blows my mind.
I mean, I don't have the time for it myself, but it's well, I think it, people continue to have to work for a living. Is my guess. But it's probably not time to give up just yet on being a
Yeah,
productive
no,
human.
I agree. Well, as we're kind of rounding third into home base, I have one more quick question for you before I hit you with the last one. What have been some of your biggest challenges and or obstacles that you've actually had to overcome? To kind of get to where you're at today. And we talked a little bit about debt. We talked about, what does it look like to kind of do that healthily? And then we talked a little bit about sales and kind of, what your organization does. What are the biggest obstacles you felt like you had to overcome?
I mean, the biggest obstacle we've overcome, and besides getting the train out of the station and actually getting a piece of software that people will purchase, that creating a piece of software that creates enough value for the people purchasing it that they actually purchase it without actually having any money to put into it is a challenge, right? And just getting that train out of the station is really hard in the world of software, I think. So that's probably one. That was one giant challenge, I think, and then the other one, COVID was a huge challenge for us, just because field sales virtually evaporated for 3 or 4 months, and people just weren't going out and meeting people face to face and selling stuff, and if you sold beer to bars, you probably lost your job because the bars were closed. So that was a huge challenge for us, and we lost 40% of our customers in 2020, and we gained a lot of them back by the end of 2020. They returned, or that business was bankrupt, but another one, same people started another one and took its place. So we ended the year down about 8% in terms of revenue.
That's
But
actually pretty good, all things
that was
considered.
yeah. I mean, we certainly weren't complaining, but the nice thing about software is it's pretty sticky, and it's pretty nimble. We were able to you know, put more of our marketing efforts on the types of customers that were able to keep doing what they were doing. Right. I mean, in June, if you were selling med devices to hospitals, you were still showing up in
Right.
person. If the doctors needed a new med device, they were talking to you, and everybody was just wearing a mask, but it still that meeting still
Right.
happened. Whereas if you were selling beer to bars, the bars were closed, so you were still screwed. So we were able to shift our focus to the types of industries that were still open, um, and doing fine. So that's nice. That's the nice thing about software, is it's
Yeah.
flexible.
Yeah, fortunate to be in the industry of software. When times are good or when times are bad, usually it's still a pretty consistent and stable industry to be in, so long as your product has real value, right? So let me ask this, kind of bring it all the way home now, Steve. I always like to ask my guests, one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self, if you were trying to do it all over again.
That's a good question. I mean, part of me wants to say start earlier on entrepreneurship, where I think I would probably actually say work at smaller companies earlier, because there was a lot you don't learn at a large company just because you're so focused on one
Right.
small thing. So I probably would have developed in my career faster. Um, Google, I really, even though it's a big company, I was able to get a lot of exposure to how small companies work, because I was working in their software division, which was only, when I joined, today it's a huge, part of what they do. But in those days, it was only like maybe 150 people in that organization, which was called Google Enterprise in those days. But it was, selling Gmail, selling Google Maps, selling anti-spam services, all kind of pre-public cloud. I mean, AWS was already doing well, but Google hadn't entered that market really. Um, Today it's all
Right.
huge, but so I would say, I guess the advice to my younger self would be work for smaller businesses early, because like I really didn't learn that much from working at places like IBM, where you're such a small cog in such a big
Right.
wheel. I mean, I guess I learned about how to be a small cog in a big machine, but I didn't learn how to a lot of useful skills for what I'm doing today, which is running a
Right.
small company.
Yeah. Well, good advice and practical advice, yeah, because I think, you do have to have a different skill set. In a small company, you have to have a multitude of skill sets versus the larger company feel where you're very narrow in what you have to focus on, which can be good, when you're in a larger organization. To be narrow is to be more focused and more calculated, but to run a small business, you can't just be one thing. So great points there. So I want to thank you for coming on here, Steve. It was really a good conversation. I thought you had a lot of really good nuggets. For me personally, if nobody else takes anything away from it, I took a lot away from it. So good on you. Where can people find you if they'd like to connect with, chat with, harass, or listen to your podcast?
I think best place to get a hold of me is LinkedIn. Just Google, or look on LinkedIn, Steve Benson Badger Maps, and I'll pop right up. And I look at that.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I think it was a fantastic conversation. You did share a lot of wisdom with everybody, and make sure you boop that like button for my man Steven and for the show, and make sure you hit the subscribe button as well, so that you can be notified of future episodes. So, Steve, thank you again for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fantastic.